sunshine. I realize I am in sunshine. The skies are turning blue. Would you like to go to the top of...
All right, welcome to another episode of Accept Truth with Joy. I'm really happy to be here with Mike Whiting. And I wanted to maybe just, Mike, have you present yourself. So you're a professor of biology at BYU. You are the director of the Bean Museum of Natural, what's the
The Bean
official
Life
name?
Science Museum.
Bean Life Science
on
Museum.
BYU campus, yes.
On BYU campus. And I'm really happy to be here. Of course, we know each other going back because you were my advisor when I was doing my PhD. So I'm really happy to sit down with you today and just talk about some things that maybe could be of help for other people as they listen to this listen to this video that we're going to do. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
So first, I want to know just a little bit more about like your personal life. Like, where did you grow up? You know, what was your family life like growing up? And tell me a little bit about you as a kid, maybe.
Yeah, so me as a kid. So I grew up, spent most of my youth in Provo, Utah. I actually grew up about 4 blocks away from where the Bean Life Science Museum is. And I always had an interest in biology. Early on, I thought maybe I'd be an ichthyologist because I liked fish. I liked to catch fish and that sort of thing. But then I had an opportunity when I was in high school to come up to the Bean Museum and volunteer as a high school student in the insect collection. And what we were doing at the time actually was we were trying to put on an insect zoo, which meant it was my job to catch insects, bring them in, keep them alive for people to come see. Well, I worked really hard that summer, caught a lot of bugs. It was my first time catching bugs, and they all kept dying, right? It's kind of hard to keep bugs alive. But what it did is it got me through the doors and got me into the collection where I entered this new amazing world of diversity. So I can remember just being awestruck the first time I went into the insect collection because, the person who was there pulled out a drawer of honeybees, right? And there were hundreds and hundreds of specimens. And I was astounded at the thought of why would someone catch and kill hundreds of bees and put little pins in them and stick them in a drawer. But I learned to love looking through that collection.
So this is when you're like 15, 16 years old or younger?
This is when I was 14, right?
Okay.
So I've been with this museum for quite some time, volunteered then, continued that through high school, started my own insect collection. I'm proud that I have the largest insect collection of anyone who's ever graduated Provo High School. Oh. That's something.
And were there like any teachers that were really influential?
Yeah, so
time?
Merrill Webb, who is a name you might have heard.
Yeah.
He's been a really influential biology teacher. He was at Provo High for many, many decades, and he continues to be associated with the museum. So he was a mentor to me. And then some faculty who were in the entomology group up here also mentored me from a really young age. I did my undergraduate work here at BYU. I was a zoology major with an entomology emphasis. And we had that emphasis back then. It was pretty sweet. So I got to take insect morphology instead of taking organic chemistry.
Oh, wow.
I got to take insect physiology instead of human physiology. So that was pretty cool.
So who were the faculty teaching these courses? This was
back in the day. So Richard Bauman
Okay.
Was a curator at the time, and so I became associated with him and did a lot of field work with him. Steve Wood was still alive at the time, and he taught some of the advanced courses in entomology, and there were other entomologists at the time.
And were your parents supportive of this, like when you were a teenager?
They thought this was a phase I was going through, right? It's like, Mike's involved with something else. He's now in his bug phase. They didn't think it could ever lead to much of anything.
Really?
But
what is your dad?
So
and
my
your
dad,
mom do?
my dad was a professor. He was a professor
Here at BYU?
At BYU, in the Department of Communications.
Okay.
And he always thought that I should go into advertising. I don't know why he wanted me in advertising. But yeah, they thought that this was, this is what kids do, right? You get fascinated with things and you sort of move on and move on. Somehow I never moved on from insects. Once I got hooked, I've been stuck with it.
Cool. And anyone else in your family does science, or are you kind of the lone person then?
Well, among my siblings, I was sort of the lone person. I have a brother who was a statistician, and he was interested in biostatistics.
Okay.
But in my family right now, my wife is also a biologist.
Mm-hmm.
She's a professor, an adjunct professor, and does herpetology.
Right.
And she's also a curator here at the Life Science Museum.
Right. And what about can you talk just a little bit about maybe your church experience? Like I imagine your family were all members of the church and everything.
Yeah. I grew up. It was, I grew up in Oak Hills region of Provo. Went to Oak Hill 7th Ward. Was there for many years. It was a pretty traditional, pretty standard upbringing. When I was ready at the age of 19, I entered the MTC. Spent 2 years in South Korea, learned the Korean language, I think it was a pretty typical sort of missionary experience with, some highs and some lows and all those things you sort of experience on a mission.
Were you able to collect any bugs while on the
I
mission?
actually was. This is terrible, but on P days, I was in South Korea. I was on an island called Jeju-do, which was off the tip of South Korea. And on some P days, I would manage to take my companion out, and we would go catch bugs. And we actually described some new species that I collected there when I was a missionary.
Oh, that's amazing.
So isn't that kind of cool?
That's awesome. So then you come home from your mission, and had you already done a little bit of undergrad?
Yeah, I did a year of
before-
undergrad,
before?
went on, did my mission, came back, finished up my undergraduate degree. And then when I became a senior, it became time to start looking around at graduate programs. And I applied to Cornell University, I applied to Berkeley and a couple other places. But I fell in love with Cornell. I received NSF graduate fellowship and had the opportunity to go there and study there.
And who was your major professor?
Well, so my major professor, I had a couple major professors when I was there. My initial major professor, his name was George Eichwart. He actually passed away
while you were there.
I was there. And so I moved on to another person named Jim Liebherr, who was a beetle specialist. But I did most of my work at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And this was at a time when DNA technology was just beginning to take off. This was at a time where the museum had some of the first PCR machines that had ever been made. And so I was able to move down into what at the time was this amazing lab to start sequencing DNA of insects, something that nobody had ever really done before.
Yeah. And then you continued, you stayed on to do a postdoc,
Yeah,
right?
I stayed on to do a postdoc there. So I did a 2-year postdoc at the American Museum. And then I was hired on to the faculty here at BYU in 97.
And were they searching for someone? Was there a position open? Or did you just say, I'm ready for a job? Or how did that go down?
They knew I was ready and they opened a position, and I was the only interview for that position, the only candidate they considered, and so they went ahead and hired me.
Was it like evolutionary biologist or entomologist?
Entomology. It was
Okay.
entomology, evolutionary biology, yeah.
Okay. And of course you've been here ever since. You haven't gone anywhere else. Well, you did go to NSF, right?
So I've done a couple sabbaticals, and I spent 1 year at NSF as a program director.
Right.
But I've spent most of my time here in Provo.
And to go to NSF and be a program director, that's I mean, I imagine that doesn't happen to just anyone. Is that something that it's like an honor to do that, or?
Well, I think so. It's a fairly prestigious thing to be asked to come and serve as a program director. So what a program director does is helps make decisions about funding, and so my funding area focused on evolutionary biology and systematics. And so I was there for only a year, but I was able to make decisions about who got funded, who did not receive funding, and also develop some new programs which helped move NSF in new directions.
That's awesome. And here at BYU, you've mostly taught what courses?
Yeah,
have been your
so
main
the courses I've taught have been evolutionary biology, a senior level course. I've taught entomology, which has also been a senior level course, and then a graduate course in a specialty in evolution called phylogenetic systematics.